Hey y'all, welcome back to Luther Souls Woven in Time by Dugan. That's Dugan. I'm Jill, and hope you're back for some more stories. And today, Dad's got a poem and a story, so hang around. He's going to do the poem at the end. So he's going to tell you the story of how, because that's what I find most interesting in all this, is how what took place, what events happened to inspire or prompt the thinking of the poem. So, Daddy.
Yeah, if you want, I think anyway, if you want some spiritual uplifting today, this may be the best one that I've written or that I've shared anyway. Um, in the story, I had a friend that was a little bit older than me. Back then, there were a lot of people older than me. Now, there's not many people older than me. This was 1992. But I had a friend that he had just retired from work. He and his wife had they had a vacation. They only had one child, and he lived in California. And we lived at that time, he and my family too lived on the peninsula of Maryland, on the Delmarva Peninsula. And Floyd he was excited that he was going to retire. He'd worked all of his life, and he was going to retire. Had a beautiful, great big uh, travel trailer, uh, recreational vehicle, whatever. One of those self-contained, you drove it and slept in it too.
RV.
RV. That's where the recreational vehicle.
Yeah.
But they had it sitting in the driveway. They were ready to go. But then he started getting sick. He was coughing a lot. Wasn't feeling good. He was weak. He went to the doctor. He had pneumonia, so he goes to the hospital. They can't get this pneumonia cleared up. And in a few weeks, they told him he had lung cancer. So he'd gone through treatment. He'd gone through a lot of things, and he had bounced back some. And he called me one day and he says, "Dugan, what are you doing?" I'm gonna say Monday morning. I don't know. Um, and I said, "I don't know. What do you want to do, Floyd?" He said, "Let's go down to Ocean City." He said, "I'd like to go down there and walk on the boardwalk." It was past Memorial or past Labor Day, so the big crowds weren't in Ocean City, Maryland at the time. Most of the vacationers had gone home, and the locals uh, were there. So I said, "Okay, let's do that." So we were going to go in the afternoon and I think it was Monday. So Monday morning he called me and he said, "Dugan, what are you doing right now?" And I said, "Well, I got to go. I had to take my daughter Holly to the doctor that day. I was going to go buy groceries." And I just started naming off things I needed to do. And I finished. I said, and he didn't say anything. It was just silence on the phone. I thought, I didn't handle this right. I don't know what's going on. I said, "Why, Floyd?" I said, "What's going on?" He said, I just wondered if you had time to come over here, but that's okay. I said, "No, I'll be over there." He, "No, you got things to do." I said, "No." I said, I'll be over there. I'll be over there in a few minutes." And no, dude, don't. You do what you got to do. I said, "Floyd, I'm going to be over there." I said, "Don't be talking anymore. I'll be over there." So I told Holly, I think her doctor's appointment was like at 1 o'clock or something. I said, "Holly, be ready to go to the doctor when I get back home." We didn't have cell phones back then. In '92, I didn't have one anyway. And
The ones that were around were bricks. It was a big old.
but I went over to Floyd's and went in. I knocked on the door and he said, "Come in." And I went in and he was sitting on his couch in his den. And I've never seen Floyd look so bad. He just couldn't. His hair wasn't combed. Number one, he always had his hair slicked down. He was always well groomed, and his hair was just everywhere. And he didn't have any energy at all. Had no color. And he said, "Dugan, I feel so bad. I don't know what to do." He said, I don't know. I just don't feel like walking." And I said, you don't want to go to Ocean City this year? Yeah, I want to go, but I don't know if I'll be able to because I feel so bad. He said, I just want somebody to talk to. Edith is at work, and he said, but you're busy. I said, I'm not busy, Floyd. I said, this is what I'm here for. Talk to you. I said, I got to take Holly to the doctor at 1 o'clock, but I said, other than that, I'm okay. Holly was a young teenager at the time. So he and I sat there and talked, and he told me, he said, the doctor told me he wanted me to walk from my back door out my driveway to the street back at least 3 times every day. And he said, so when I feel like I got the energy, he said, I want you to walk with me out there. I said, okay, I can do that. So we talked about everything. He talked mostly about his granddaughter. I remember he talked a lot about his granddaughter and they were planning on going to see them, I think right after Christmas or something, or maybe for Christmas. They lived in California, so that's the reason they got that RV. They wanted to go see their son and their granddaughter, and their daughter-in-law was expecting another one. He was excited about that, but he talked about that granddaughter a lot. I think she's like 9 years old at the time. And that was the only grandchild they had because Keith was the only son they had. And we talked, and he finally said, he said, Dugan, I'm going to try to walk out to the street. He said, will you help me out to the... So I did, and he had about 2 steps to go down to get out of his house down to the patio and then go out to the driveway. And he got down there. I got in front of him so he could hold on to me. And we got out. He had an El Camino. And we got out there, and he said, let's open the tailgate of this and let me sit down and rest a minute, Dugan. So we sat there and we talked. Again, he talked mostly about his granddaughter. So after a few minutes, he said, Dugan, he said, let's walk out to the street. Let's get at least one time done today. So we didn't get halfway to the street, and he told me, he said, Dugan, he took me by the arm. He said, I'm gonna have to go back. I can't make it out there and back. He said, I'm not sure I can make it in the house. So we got back to the back of his truck. He sat down on the tailgate again. We sat there and talked a little bit more. Him again talking mostly about his son, his granddaughter, and his daughter-in-law, and the trip they wanted to take. Well, finally he said, Dugan, I got to get back in the house. I got to be able to. I got to rest. I can't do this. So I helped him get into the back door and get up those 2 steps. And so I stayed with him until Edith came home for lunch. She worked at the doctor's office, and she came home from lunch, and he told her he wanted to go to bed, and she said, Dugan, will you help me put him in bed? And I said, yeah. So took both of us because of this time he could hardly walk. So we got him in bed, and once we got him in bed, I just left to come back to the den, and she talked to him a little bit and got him settled in. He didn't need anything, and she came back to me and she told me, she said, I just got a call from the doctor, and the cancer's back in his bloodstream and it's in his brain. And I said, no. I said, did you tell him? She said, no, I'm gonna let the doctor do that. She said, I've got an appointment, or I'm supposed to get an appointment. I don't have it yet. I'm supposed to go see. I'm supposed to take him up there this afternoon. And I said, well, I said, either I got to take Holly to the doctor at 1 o'clock. And she said, well, I'll call you when we get the appointment. She said, will you come back and help me get him in the car and help me get? I said, yeah, I will. So I went home, took Holly to the doctor, and went to get a prescription filled for Holly. And as I'm coming out, I meet Edith. She's going in to get something. And she told me, she said, the doctor's appointment's at 3 o'clock. Can you be over there? I said, yeah, I'll take Holly home and I'll come on over there. So I did, and we got him in the car and took him up there. And the doctor told him, said, she told him, Mr. Meadows, your cancer is back. It's in your bloodstream. And he said, well, what did I do? And she said, well, the only thing I know we can do is go through another session of chemo. And he says, can you promise me that that will get rid of it? If you, she said, no, sir, I can't. She said, I can't. He said, no, I don't want to do it. He said, I'm not afraid of dying. He said, dying is not my problem. He said, I did want to see that baby girl of mine one more time, or my granddaughter one more time or something. And that just grated on me. I didn't have any grandkids at the time, but I knew how dearly I loved my kids. And I knew how much he had loved, or he loved his granddaughter. Just the talking that we had done that one day. So I come home and I start writing a poem. Well, first of all, I think I started writing a letter to this little girl that I didn't know about how much her granddaddy loved her. And in a matter of about 2 or 3 days, I'd written 9 pages. And I don't write fast. I don't do anything fast. But except go to sleep, I can do that pretty quickly. But I'd written 9 pages of this little girl. And then on Thursday, Floyd passed away. Well, they brought him back on the way to the hospital. They brought him back, and then on Friday morning, he died. And I read this poem at his funeral. His wife asked me to read the poem. He never heard it, but I read it to her, and she asked me if I would read it, and I said sure. But another thing about this poem, I would work some arts and crafts shows and whatever, trying to put my poetry out where people could see it. I used to work every first weekend in October. I think it was called the Foothills Fall Festival or something like that at the Asheville Mall in Asheville, North Carolina. And I got this poem printed, and I took it up there, and that was one of the ones that I would sell and exhibit, and people had an opportunity to buy. Several years after that, Walmart in McDowell County, North Carolina, which is about 30 miles from Asheville.
And that's where the craft show was, up in Asheville?
Yeah, it was in Asheville.
Okay.
But I was in a Walmart 30 miles from Asheville, and I didn't know anybody around there. I was looking for whatever I was looking for, and I was trying to find it, and I don't find things real easy. And somebody to my right said something, and I knew they weren't talking to me because I didn't know anybody around there. And I knew very few people, and they would have walked up to me and got my attention. But this lady, she said something, and I'm still looking for the item that I'm looking for. She got a little closer to me, and she says again, she said, are you a poet? No. Well, I guess that's what she said, because I turned and I said, excuse me? I said, were you talking to me? She said, yes, ma'am. She said, yes, sir. I said, I'm glad you said that, because I'm not a lady. She says, yes, sir. She said, are you a poet? And I've never stumbled over myself so bad. I know nobody had ever called me a poet. I never considered myself a poet. I just loved writing poetry. I loved rhyming, and I loved writing stuff that would touch people. And I said, and finally I just blurted out, well, I've written poetry. And she said, my mother had one of your poems that stayed on the table beside her chair as long as she lived. And I said, what poem was that? She said, a season of pain, a season of peace. And that touched me. Number one, it was written especially for Floyd, and I knew it meant a lot to Edith. And number two, no one had ever called me a poet. And now here I am being called a poet, and I even admitted it to some degree. And since that time, I've accepted the fact that, yeah, whether you like my work or not, I am a poet. So that gave me a little more confidence, and For several years, and I don't know why, I've always written in waves. I'll write for a while, sometimes for several years, and then all of a sudden it's just like everything dries up, and I write again after a few years. I, just different things prompt me to start writing again. And one time, a guy offered me an Indian head penny if I'd write him a poem, and that got me writing again. Maybe I have to tell that story separately. But um, I did that. That did give me some confidence, and I've read this poem. Other folks and other people have requested, and I know it's brought some peace and some, I guess, some resolution to some people. And so now, I guess that's what you've waited for. I'm going to share the poem, a season of pain, a season of peace. And it's not a very long poem, but it does. Um, it has a lot of meaning, at least to people like Floyd or to Edith. Um, a season of pain, a season of peace. I ponder why this happened to me, sick and afflicted to this degree. Why me, I ask, what are the reasons for me to suffer through these seasons? No answer comes, the grief remains. With bitter lips I curse these pains. But then a voice from deep inside quietly says, let peace abide. Then when the peace comes over me, though still in pain, reflect I see. 'Twas Jesus in Gethsemane that suffered more than this for me. And that's the end of it. Thank you.
So when you wrote that, did Floyd, had he asked you to write a poem?
No,
No.
that's what I did when
So that was you working through coping
with
with that and grieving part of the grieving. Okay, the grieving process for Floyd. And then you shared it with Edith, and she asked you to share it at his funeral.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you wrote all these pages to his granddaughter, did you share the poem with her too?
Well, I did actually did. I never sent that to her granddaughter. Then in 2019, was this 92?
92, yeah.
So 12, almost 30 years later, this young lady now is married and got a child of her own. And I think her grandmother told me she was living in Idaho at the time. But anyway, in 2019, I'm glad you mentioned this, Jill, because this is a story too that I should have told. 2019, when we left Georgia and moved to Arizona, I'm going through all these boxes and things, just like the stuff where I found Jimmy Simpson's address. I found this book. It was a spiral ring notebook, and it was a new spiral ring notebook. But I looked in it, and it was this letter, these notes that I'd written to Floyd Meadows' granddaughter. Nothing else was written in that book. And I thumbed through there, so I called a friend of mine. I didn't know where Edith was at the time because Edith had, years later, she remarried, and I didn't know if she had moved back to West Virginia or she was still in Maryland. But I called a mutual friend, and she said that Edith was still in Maryland, and she gave me Edith's phone number. So I called Edith, and I told Edith what had happened. I told her about finding this letter, these that I'd written, 9 pages I'd written to her granddaughter from Floyd the week before Floyd died. And she said, "Oh, dude, that would be great." I said, "Do you have her address where I can send it to her?" She said, "Send it to me and I'll get it to her. I'd love to give it to her." So I started to retype it because when I can't spell and I scratch through and I do everything. I don't write on a computer. I do everything in longhand and in cursive, and then I'll scratch through and change it. And so it had all this in there, and I thought, well, I think I first thought, well, I'm going to just go back and rewrite it so it'd just be neater. And I thought, no, I don't want to. It'll be neater if I type it. So I got on the computer and I started, and I didn't get a page done because I am so slow when I try to type anything. So I just folded up, took it to the post office, sent the whole book just like I'd sent it to her. I mean, just like I'd written it the day I wrote it, for the days I'd written it. And so about a week later, I went by and I hadn't heard anything. And I insured that book for like it was gold. I mean, I insured it for $1,000 or something. I don't know, because it really meant a lot to me. And a week went by and I hadn't heard anything from Edith, so I thought I'd call her. I called her. And she said, "Oh, Dugan, I've been meaning to call you." She said, "I live where the house I live in now is way back off the road." She said, "My driveway is a long driveway." And she said, "I walk out to the mailbox every day. That's part of my exercise routine." And she said, "I walked out to the mailbox and I got this package. I knew what it was and I ripped it open." She said, "I cried all the way back to the house." She said, "My granddaughter's not getting this." She said, "She'll get it when I die, but she won't get it
Oh
before I die."
gosh.
She said, "I'm keeping this." She said, "I love it, Dugan." And she said, "I've read it more than one time already." And she said, "But she will get it. She will know about it." But she said, "This is mine till I'm gone." So I hope the granddaughter got it.
What a treasure. Now, when you sent the pages that you had written, did you send the poem too? Because I know Edith
Yeah.
already had the poem.
Yeah, I think I sent a copy of that poem. Maybe
for the granddaughter too.
maybe a couple copies. I'm not sure.
That's awesome. That's a really cool. That's a treasure for her. Awesome. And she expressed that to you. So
Yeah.
very cool, Dad. Even if your daddy does call you sappy.
Yeah, I am pretty sappy according to my dad.
All right, tell him to be pretty.
Y'all be pretty, and don't forget to like and subscribe and share and
Leave your comments.
yes, leave comments.
Dugan likes responding, so leave your comments so he can chit chat with
I
you.
really do, and I appreciate everybody that watches these. Thank you so much.
Thank y'all.
And again, be pretty.